Welcome to Impact and Influence, the podcast for current and emerging leaders to build on leadership capability, sustainability, and purpose. This series opens the door to what's possible to build a life in leadership by design, not by default. Brought to you by Regrowth Consultancy, powered by Flick It Over. Flick It Over is a leading electronic software platform. Flick It Over provides industry-specific solutions to improve process, client experience, and efficiencies. Make your document delivery and workflow seamless with Flick It Over. Today, we're joined by Gavin Croft, the Chief Operating Officer for Ray White in Queensland, a great mate, a past colleague, and I think the best auctioneer in the country. Now, won't I get in trouble for saying that with everybody that I work with, Crofty?
Everyone has their own opinion, so no one's right, no one's wrong, but we're all entitled to it.
Well, I've just seen you work so incredibly hard over the time that we've known one another. And I can remember you saying 19 years ago, we were sitting around having a few sherbets and you just say, look, I just want to be the best auctioneer in the country and I'm going to work towards that and I'm going to reduce all the noise around me and I'm just going to go for it. And I would say you've done a pretty good job of that, Gav, but you have worked incredibly hard. And for those that might have been under a rock for the last 10 or 15 years that don't know who you are, would you mind just explaining to us where you operate, how many sort of auctions you're calling a year, like in the last 2 years, and what your role looks like currently at Ray White, please?
I come out to spend some time there. My Sydney time was probably my most valuable time, really understanding auctioneering as a craft. So I really probably honed my skills and the ability to work with auction agents who, in my opinion, were some of the best in the country at that time, no question around it. You have to step up and you have to be able to execute at a level that demands their skill set as well. So it was a really good opportunity over 8 or 9 years in Sydney to really refine, work on the craft, work on exactly what high-level execution looks like in auctions. I actually don't think we spend a lot of time as an industry on that. What does that look like? How do we achieve it? So for me, spending time in that space, really understanding it was invaluable. And then to be able to bring that back to Brisbane in between a stint in Auckland and spending some time in that auction space was a wonderful learning experience. And then over the last 5 years now, so just over 2,000 auctions a year for the last 5 years. So it's been a busy time, but one of the things I've sort of found is Brisbane itself. If I had have said to you maybe 5 or 10 years ago, those sort of numbers were achievable, it would look very differently on the auction floor. And what I mean by that, it's the speed of the market here in Queensland has changed. The acceptance of auctions by consumers, the understanding of real estate agents has grown like extraordinarily over the last 5 years. So Sydney, Auckland and Melbourne were always the leaders in the auction space. But can I tell you, Brisbane now, it is just as sophisticated. The level of execution from agents, their understanding here has gone to a new level. And that's probably enabled me now to be able to flourish here in Queensland and be able to drive those sort of volumes. So it's been a really cool journey and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed.
It's funny, you and I were actually talking about this around Christmas time as to Queensland, like they've arrived. And we really noticed that 5 years ago when we launched Regrowth as well, the sophistication and the acumen and I think the discipline and commitment to the craft has changed as well. Do you think that's been also fed by the buyer migration of people moving up there as well?
It's played a role in it. It's no longer a big country town. And then the other one, you've got these new wave of agents coming through. So I think in Queensland we're getting better, but we're also getting younger coals. And so the demographic of agents and the age profile, it's probably 10 years younger now, the average agent, compared to what it was 10 years ago. And that's exciting. And these guys come with new energy and new belief systems, and what they're able to achieve is extraordinary. There's a young guy called Brad Wilson who works in the Ray White network, and another young gentleman called Ethan Petrie. These guys, I think Brad did 175 auctions himself last year. Ethan did 167, I think. They've just set new benchmarks around what can be achieved as an auction agent here in Queensland, and I think nationally.
So, Crofty, this podcast is all around leadership, and I really want to take this down the road today of what leadership in an auction space can do for you. And really, when you understand the process, you trust the process, you become committed to the process, what it does for you and your profile in industry, but what it also does to your leadership position with your customer and with respect to recruitment as well. But before we go down that path, how has being a great auctioneer with the discipline and structure of calling 2,000 plus auctions a year helped you with discipline and structure with leadership in your role for what you're doing now?
I probably, when you love what you do, you probably just don't think about, you probably should think about a little bit more, but process and structure is not, it's just not inside of me. It's not part of my DNA. But what I think Queensland does really well, it allows you to, people here, agents here and consumers here are very comfortable to think outside the box and when they bid, buy and secure for real estate. So it's not uncommon that we're having auctions on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. or a Thursday morning at 11 a.m. or we're having auctions at Tuesday at 3 p.m. as an example. They're just not unusual times.
So no one's saying, oh, Gav, you can't do an auction at that time. It doesn't work. So the belief is there that we'll give it a crack and it might work.
And it does. And I think the one thing that we have learned, it's irrelevant when it is. It's the quality of the work. It's the quality of the understanding. You're not dealing with noise outside. So I don't like using it, but everyone, again, you go back years ago, everyone wanted Saturday at 11 a.m. That's the busiest, most noisiest time. You want to be able to attract attention and you want to be able to put a property in the spotlight. We've just looked at January, and as you would probably see, January is one of the quietest months of the year. We had a look at it. Yeah, we've probably seen it. Realestate.com and all the portals have their highest engagement in January. We've just had some of our highest average open home attendances through Ray White in January because there was a spotlight. We're able to put properties up on a pedestal and we're not competing with other properties, other noise, and we're not competing in other space. And what it went to show is just how important that is if you can achieve it. So you know that Thursday at 11 a.m., you're not competing with other auctions, other open homes, and you're able to isolate it. And there's been huge advantages, one from a time efficiency point of view, but also from the consumer is saying, well, I can make time for that. That's important for me. And there has never been an issue of being able to get a buyer at that time. And I think with the way technology is now, you can bid and buy from wherever you are in the world, which makes it nice and easy. So that can only be looked at, and you referred to it a little bit earlier, Coles, when you said, some agents will push back and say, well, I'm not sure if that's going to work. Leaders don't think like that. So if you're a genuine leader and you have a leadership role, you can't think like that. You've got to be able to think outside the dots and do things that other people aren't doing and play where you can win. So if you have thought in that space, I find that those officers, those agents who think in that space just command attention and really go ahead, leaps and bounds.
It's the time, right, to be open to what's possible. Things have changed, how people shop, how people make decisions, the information that they've got, the speed of the information, the quality of the information. So there's always being open-minded as a leader is incredibly important. I find it hilarious though, Crofty, when I ask you the question about discipline and structure, you're like, it's just not in me, Carls, because I'm thinking about how you run your auction business and the role that you're in and the quality of the work and the preparation of your year. But what I would say is probably what has helped you, and tell me if I'm wrong, and give your advice to our listeners about the importance of knowing highest and best use of time and where you want to spend your time and when you don't, and what you've had to do around administration support or logistics around you to give you the opportunity to grow your business, do over 2,000 auctions a year, and grow your leadership position as one of the country's best auctioneers. What did you have to put in place, and how much time do you put into planning every year?
Yeah, well, I guess at the start of the year, it's about planning out with an office, what do we want to achieve and what's possible? What can we write? If your business is going backwards, you've got to address that. And again, if we're not growing, we're going backwards. So I think first and foremost, at the start of every year with each business, we've just got to work out where can we go with this and what can we take? Also, what can we improve? What can we get a little bit better? So just planning that out. We look at metrics here at Ray White. There's things like internal auction share. If I use that language, Coles, does that resonate with you if I use that language? Internal auction.
Absolutely, that's great.
So internal auction share is in essence the percentage of auctions versus the percentage of private treaty. And what we've seen really clearly is there's a very clear correlation between the higher the internal auction share, the higher an office's market share. And we've seen over the years some of the best auction businesses are some of the best real estate businesses in the country. Of course, they're really good at recruitment, but they're layered with their auction business, and it's become such a pivotal part of not only attracting talent, but attracting consumers and showcasing their expertise in real time. And so, it's looking at all those things and building out a plan for the next 12 months and a commitment to say, well, again, whether it's every Thursday at 11 a.m. or Friday at 9 a.m., then there'll be a piece there where we reflect on the auctions. There'll be the training piece that we add into it, that we're continuing to build the best auction business that we can. And what we do know is if you build the number one auction business in your suburb and you do it bigger and better than anyone else, probably find results follow, market share follows, and everything else does. So ensuring we're playing well in that space is pivotal.
So, Crofty, we are continually bemused. As you know, I was auction trained and I was as an auction agent when I was in sales, but there is this constant debate, I guess, if you like, but auction doesn't work in our area, Carls. And I'm like, well, let's have a look at cash flow. We can reduce days on market with auction. We can control the process. You've got commitment, and on it goes, right, with boards. And we all know the pros and the advantages of doing auction. What would you say to a principal who is struggling with cash flow and struggling to recruit who's not open to auction?
You get that all just comes back to a mindset. Leaders don't think. People who want to take a clear leadership position in a market simply don't think like that. I find one of the hardest pieces here is it's not that it doesn't work, it's that you have to go through a period of time to change consumers' perception of what that means. I always say it's like a seller. It's like a seller at an auction. They don't know what they're doing auction day. It's like, for them, it's like being on a roller coaster. And you know what it's like? You're up, you're down, you're up and around. You don't think straight on it. And so what we know is whenever a consumer or a buyer or a seller are faced with something new, the first thing that they do is push back. And so our ability to be able to handle those conversations and overcome that first hurdle, that's the hardest piece of the puzzle. So once they do that, that sort of sets the tone to say, yep, we're going to push through this and we're going to ensure that we're able to push auctions, but do it with real understanding. And so be able to have quality conversations in that piece is first. The second one is it's really difficult for an agent who's been private treaty for so long. And what you've got to do is now look at saying, let's say you're a buyer, Coles, for a property. Instinctively, every single real estate agent who does private treaty, the first thing that they want to do is sell you the property. I've got my buyer and now I'm hooked in and I want to sell it to you. Whereas it's a very different mindset when you're working with auctions. What you're looking at doing there is I'm looking to build a relationship with you and carry you through and service you through to auction day. So those agents who struggle to build relationships or who are not in the service game tend to really struggle because they're really transactional. It's catch and kill, and they're so used to catch and kill. When it comes to building the relationship and servicing, they find it really difficult. So I find the transition for people to be able to build relationships with buyers and service buyers, that's the game. The better they can do that, auctions become really easy. But it's hard for people if you've been in that catch and kill space for an extended period of time.
I think too, Crofty, we were very, very lucky. We were trained from early on that auction was really the only way. It was the way to control the process and also make sure you were getting the best result for your client, which is what it's all about. So being trained and ingrained in it makes it much easier. But what I would say is for anyone listening who is a leader that is looking at building market share and being more competitive with recruitment and getting the best result for your client is in 2026 is just be open to finding out more about it, or at least giving your team the opportunity to find out more about auction education, getting them more educated in the process and trusting the process. What would you say to that, Gav, about what you see about agents that don't trust the process?
100%. And that's just understanding, and that's learning. And it does take time. I remember when I was an auction agent, I think I passed in my first 11. I could have thrown the towel in at any stage. A very good friend of ours, and I probably won't say his name, but you know him very, very well. He passed in, I think, his first 18 auctions, and I called all of them. And I remember on the 19th, looked over to him and it hit reserve, and he just had this look like, I've got it now. I know what I've been doing wrong. And he ended up becoming number one in his market as a result of getting that right. So, not only does it attract, it builds market share, it does all those little things, it minimises days on market. But the big one for me is, our job is, we know we've got to create competition. We know that when you create competition, you get the highest price possible. And when you create competition and you put people on an auction floor competing against each other, it changes mindset and it changes behaviour. And it's one of the most powerful things that we can do for a home seller is change the mindset and the behaviour of a buyer. And when we do, they do things that they wouldn't normally do. And I'll give you an example of that. A really good friend of mine was bidding at an auction recently, and he's rung me up and he says, look, Gav, he said, I'm going to go to 800 on this particular apartment, no more. I reckon that's about fair. And I said, mate, if that's it, what do you think you're going to do? Oh, I'm going to start it at 700. I'm going to try and control the bidding in 20s and no more. And then I'm going to slow it up once we get to about 780. Great. Excellent. He walked into the auction room. There was about 150 to 200 people sitting inside the auction room, and he rang me. He goes, I'm going to go to 820. Now, the auction hadn't even started, and you can see already how the mindset and the behaviour had changed based on his perception of the energy and tension inside of the room. And we've got a real role to be able to create that environment, because it's that environment that changes things and those outcomes for sellers. So, I get to see it each and every day of my life. We just had not last Saturday, the Saturday before, we put up 140 auctions in one day on the Gold Coast. And to have 400 and 500 people in a room, another 2,500 people online, and the energy and the atmosphere and the tension that you're able to build and create, not only for home sellers, but for buyers to sit there and in absolute transparency and see what everyone's bidding. It was such a special day, and we love to be able to create things that are really special for clients.
And Gav, you mentioned energy there. I think it's an incredibly important part of it. And you're not going to talk about auctions all day long, but I want to be mindful not to get into an auction training session, which you and I can often do. But we're going to cover that in April, but more on that, is around that energy and the importance of being the chief energy officer. Sounds a bit wanky, I know, but it is what it is the importance of energy as a leader. How has that served you over the years?
It's everything. You have to. People thrive on it. People pick up on it. Energy, conviction, they're all tied in, and these are the things that people buy. Particularly when someone's trying something new for the first time, if you don't have that about you, it just makes it 10 times harder. So you come back to, what encompasses so many elements that encompass leadership, but you've hit the nail on the head. Energy is such a huge, important one that people thrive on and follow and run with. So never to be underestimated. People pick up on it, don't they?
So there is a lot that encompasses leadership. If I had to say to you, what's one word, Gav? What does leadership mean to you?
I think for me over the years, and one of the wonderful things of working at Ray White, there's some really wonderful leaders inside of this company that you get to learn from. When you see someone who you know very clearly. It's just crystal clear, Kyle's, what they stand for and what they're wanting to achieve. And you want to jump on that journey with them because you feel, you know where they're heading, you feel that they're the right person to take you there. And when you get that sort of feel around it, there is nothing more special around that. But that only comes from just a level of someone engaging you, being, just giving you this vision that you buy into. And when you sort of hear that and feel that, it's just this wonderful X factor of leadership that you see, and you just, well, I'm part of this and I'm heading there. And like I said, Ray White have some wonderful leaders. Dan White is such a fine leader inside of not only Ray White, but this industry. And you look up to someone like Dan, and you learn so much day in, day out by the way he conducts himself and handles scenarios. It's, it's compelling.
I think, Gav, when you say crystal clear for what they stand for and clarity of that vision where they're going, they'll create followers. And I think that's a bit of a challenge sometimes for our industry when you've got someone that's been a selling principal and they've ended up with the office by default, and perhaps they're not crystal clear on where they're going themselves. So I call that purpose. A lot of people call it your why. How important has that been for you for a North Star in your career?
Well, it's everything, isn't it? Yeah. Once you become clear on the why, it's, it is everything. Recently my why changed last year, and why I wake up to do what I did. My number one thing was, I look back and 8 or 9 years ago, I wanted to be the number one auctioneer in the country, and nothing was going to stop at that. When I achieved that, it's nice, but it kind of didn't. It lost its sort of feel after a little while, and I went, I need to challenge myself. I need to jump out of the auction lane. I still want to be there because it's still a really important part of who I am. But it's really important to develop yourself in your thinking and your mindset and your leadership in other areas, not only for longevity, but I think to challenge yourself personally, Coles. So for me, that's been really important.
I think too, though, sometimes people get confused in leadership. I've got this purpose at work, but guys, I would just say listening, it's hugely important to have, you can have a personal purpose and a business purpose, or allow it to change and evolve. So Gav, if you're happy to share, how has that changed for you in your role, and what have you done to have a conversation with the powers that be, or how did you get into the swim lane that you're in now, and how is that serving you better to complement your leadership skills?
I've worked closely with Jason Andrew for a long time, and I think Jason's a wonderful leader and has evolved into a exceptionally high quality leader over the years. And Jason's probably aware my time in the industry over, I think it started in 2001. When you've started as a salesperson, you've been a principal, you've run a franchise network, you've grown an auction business, you've seen different marketplaces, you've been involved in mergers. I think that that ability to be able to take in that information and that sort of knowledge, I think for me it was probably time that I was able to utilise that in a different way, Coles, and not just stay in the auction lane. I think, to Jason's point, he sort of perhaps recognised that there was a place there, and I'm still only early days in the role there, working COO for Ray White Queensland. But it was important that I bought into where Jason wanted to go, and that I made sure that I was able to take my last sort of 25 years in real estate and ensure I can add some value to what Jason's trying to create here in Queensland.
And alignment, how often would you spend? So I think that's something in leadership. If you're in a partnership or you're working with other key leadership team members, that sometimes we don't have enough conversations or focus on that alignment of what's important for the greater good of the business or our team. How much time do you spend in that space?
Daily.
Yeah, and what does that look like, Gav?
So that's a phone call every morning. For 15 to 20 minutes.
Yep, with Jason?
With Jason, yeah.
Yep.
Just discussing, obviously, what's important, what's happening, what's happening on the ground, Is there anything that we need to be across? Is there, what is it today that we can really shift the needle and try to identify what it is and making sure that we get the right impact.
And quarterly, what would you guys talk about? Is that any different to weekly or monthly?
We'll set the plan for the year. So we've just been through our leadership and planning piece for the next 12 months. We've also had our 3-day retreat there as a network as well, where we're putting everything into practice and play as to what is it that we want to achieve over the next 12 months and what does that look like. Understanding what are the key projects in order to achieve the key goals, how do we allocate, what are the resources that we're required. So I think coming into 2026, we're really clear on what needs to be done, but you've got to check in on the way and ensure that we reflect, come back, well, is that working? Do we need to pivot? I think the wonderful piece around the size of the team is we can still remain agile despite it being quite a big organisation. Agility, and I'm sure you're well aware, it's just so important these days that you've got to remain agile. Things change really quickly. You spoke about that a little bit earlier. So that ability to step back in the moment and say, hey, hold on, let's just put a break on this for a moment. Do we need to head in a different direction? Do we need to pivot? Or are we on track? And so, I think that sort of daily catch up and then those moments where you get a couple of hours, you might be working on a project and you get to reflect and you say, no, that's not working. I probably need to revisit that. So there's a lot of space. Reflection's such an important piece of the puzzle. It doesn't matter what you do, but when you're heading towards a bigger picture or you're trying to achieve that big rock that you set out to achieve, you've got to take the time to reflect and work out and stay in the moment, but by also looking ahead at the same time.
So, Gav, that's slowing down to speed up, to spend time reflecting, auditing, having a conversation with those that matter in your organisation or outside trusted mentors or business coaches or whoever you get into these lockaways, I think is imperative. But unfortunately, because we're working at pace a lot of the time in our industry and not every organisation has got the advantage of a leadership team or, business partners. What would you say to anyone that is like a one-man or one-lady show with maybe a rent roll of under 500 properties and they're responsible for 70% of the revenue? Do you think it's imperative for them to still stop and do these reflections or these lockaways or time off site to look at how they improve their business, what's working, what's not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you've got, it's a single operator or whether you've got 100 staff. Everyone needs to spend time in that space, and it's balancing. It's balancing out. It's just not looking at the numbers and the business, but it's looking at wellness. It's looking at high performance. It's looking at all these different moving parts as being a business owner, and just stopping for a moment. And it's such an integral piece. And what you can see some of the businesses that really shift the needle work with business coaches. They work with other leaders. They gain insights from people outside of the industry just to check in and say, well, hold on, let's just lift the bonnet on the business for a day or two and let's really look inside. And look, I think if you're not doing that as a business owner, at least twice a year and at least having a couple of check-ins on the journey, it's kind of alarm bells. It's a red flag.
I think it was about 12 years ago or 15 years ago, you left our industry for a little while to explore what leadership looked like in a different sector. What did you discover?
That I love real estate.
Had to come back.
Yeah, I did. Well, but what's interesting, I think what's really good, and I think the most important piece is when you work inside of this industry, you can become stale with your thinking. And one of the pieces that I gained, it was really interesting just to see, like, for instance, how retail look at leadership or how they deal with the consumer. The consumer experience and the work some industries are putting into that is phenomenal. And so the ability to be able to tap into that, I've found it, absolutely integral. So I think if we've got the ability to step outside of our industry and see what other what other industries are doing, what other businesses are doing outside of real estate. Incredibly invaluable. I know we do as an industry, we do a lot of study tours and we go and have a look, what are people doing in Sydney and Melbourne, in Auckland, and we look at some of these, these big capital cities and these big marketplaces, and we look at it. But for me, you're trying to build a business, you're trying to develop a great culture. Look at some of the businesses, across Australia that have some of the best cultures. Why don't we go and visit them?
I think it's really important.
I don't know if they do it anymore, but I think the Australian Financial Review used to do, top 50 businesses culturally. Who are the top cultures?
There's a lot of reports out like that, and I think it's incredibly important. And we've noticed that, Gav, the last couple of years with our study tours now, we're trying to bring in other businesses and other sectors. So like the one we're coming up and doing at the Gold Coast this year, we're going to Riviera and look at their innovation centre, their client experience centre, some hospitality groups to see how they induct and onboard. Because I think it's important to keep your finger on the pulse with things in our industry where people are doing it better or they've broken it and they've failed, and we can learn from them. But just importantly, like you say, other sectors who are doing things better than us that we should be able to take away from and learn, evolve. Gav, what are you listening to, reading or engaging with at the moment that is helping you maintain your great level of leadership, or something we could learn from?
I just picked it up. I probably picked it up a couple of years ago.
Oh, good old Atomic Habits.
But it's just making sure that I'm back and I'm running. When I'm running at full speed now, making sure that I'm spending time efficiently. So I just find it's a wonderful reminder. Atomic Habits, it's a wonderful reminder of making sure efficiency and how you spend your time is absolutely critical. So I think that's what I'm reading at the moment. And did you ask about podcast?
Yes. What are you listening to? What are some faves?
Regrowth.
Pay you later, Crofty. I love it.
We'll leave it at that. It's good. Now you've done some work. There's been a couple of really, really good pieces there. So well done to you on those.
Thanks, Gav. I actually love, in my daughter's year 11 class, their school has just given them Atomic Habits to read for their discipline and structure around study this year and learning from that. And I think, guys, books are a great way too, if you've got people starting with you or audibles and sharing in your WhatsApp group or whatever your communication cadence is or channel in your office is incredibly important. What do we do well in leadership, and where could we improve as an industry?
Challenging the status quo. I think, how many businesses at the moment are comfortable where they're at, and where are we consistently challenging the status quo? So I think that would be fair to say, just because it works now, does it mean it's going to be working in 3 to 5 years? Or what we're doing well works, what can we be doing better, and are we challenging that, and how are we thinking about it? So I think for me, spending time in that, that deeper level of thinking and trying to solve some of the problems that maybe are not here now, and how can we get better at that, seems to be a place that's difficult, and that's not easy. But as a business leader, things are going to be different. We've seen how this business has changed in the last 5 years and 10 years. It's going to be doing the same. And are we staying ahead of the game, or are we gradually falling behind? I think the other piece too is around commission rates, Kylie. I think that if you have a look around the nation, our ability to articulate what we do and our value proposition is a real weak point. And we need to get a hell of a lot better at being able to demonstrate that. In a lot of markets, it's a race to the bottom to win the consumer, and that's dangerous. So, I think that's the other piece that we need to start looking at really seriously, because there are agents there who are worth absolutely every dollar and more, but their ability to articulate that's another point. So I think we need to get really good in that space.
Very wise words to leave us with, and I'm quite passionate about that. That's a whole other podcast about articulating value. Gav, thank you so much for sharing with us today a little bit about becoming a leader in the auction space and auction leadership and what it can do to you and your business, for sharing your journey and your insights into leadership. We're incredibly grateful for your time, and congratulations on a rockstar career.
Yep. Thank you, Coles. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Impact and Influence. Click follow to get notified about future episodes. Leaving a review helps others find the podcast. And to learn more about our courses, our study tours, conferences, keynote topics, and our services, or how simply we might be able to help support you in taking you to places you never thought possible, please visit regrowthkyliewalsh.com. Impact and Influence, brought to you by Regrowth Consultancy, powered by Flick It Over. Flick It Over is a leading electronic software platform. Flick It Over provides industry-specific solutions to improve process, client experience, and efficiencies. Make your document delivery and workflow seamless with Flick It Over.